Welcome to Nero Wolfe's world, where orchids bloom and secrets unfold. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Archie will keep score, Wolfe won't admit he cares. Subscribe for more classic Nero Wolfe mysteries. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the man who called Cramer a murderer. If you'd told me that Inspector Cramer would one day call this house not to snarl, not to threaten a warrant, but to ask for help, I'd have laughed hard enough to spill Wolfe's beer. But that's exactly what happened at 9:12 on a Thursday evening, when the phone rang and my sense of order took a nosedive. I was at my desk in the office, feet up, reading the sports page aloud for my own amusement. Wolfe had retired from the dinner table with his usual cargo of contentment and a glass of brown ale. Fritz's roast duck had been excellent, and peace hung over the brownstone like the afterglow of a good sermon. The orchids were asleep, the city hummed beyond the curtained windows, and I was about ready to call it a night. Then the phone decided to make history. "Goodwin," I said, expecting Lon Cohen or maybe a wrong number. What I got was a voice that sounded like it had been boiled in bourbon and ground glass. "Goodwin, get Wolfe, damn it, it's Cramer." That pulled my feet off the desk. "Inspector, this hour? What's the emergency? Run out of cigars?" He ignored that. "Tell him I need to see him, now. It's important." There was a kind of drag in his voice I'd never heard before, like a man trying not to sink in wet concrete. I dropped the wisecracks. "Is it official business?" "No," he said. "Personal. For God's sake, Archie, tell him that. When a police inspector invokes the Almighty, you can bet your last nickel it's serious." I hung up and crossed the room to Wolfe's chair. He was sitting in it, not reclined but erect, eyes closed, holding the beer glass as though it were a relic of St. Gambrinus. "Sir," I said, "we have a caller." "I have indigestion," he replied without opening his eyes. "Then you'll have company. Cramer's on his way, and this time he's not bringing a warrant. He's bringing trouble." That got him. His eyes opened like shutters lifting on a foggy morning. "Cramer? At this hour? Voluntarily?" He sounded like a man who's lost his hat, his pride, and maybe his pension. Wolfe sighed, set the beer on its coaster, and pressed the bell cord. Fritz appeared within a minute, the immaculate Swiss face registering mild concern. Wolfe instructed him to prepare coffee and sandwiches. "For our visitor," he said. "Inspector Cramer will be here shortly. He is, apparently, in distress." "Jawohl, Herr Wolfe." Fritz vanished, efficient as always. By the time the doorbell rang, Wolfe had adjusted the office lighting. He liked the lamplight low and even, shadows tucked neatly where they belonged. The place smelled of paper, tobacco, and the faint lemon of Fritz's polish. I opened the door, and there he was, Inspector Cramer, 6 feet of red-faced misery, wrapped in a wrinkled overcoat. His cigar was clenched like a lifeline. "Evening, Inspector," I said. "If this is a social call, you've come to the wrong joint. Fritz's bedtime's in 10 minutes. He brushed past me, grunting. "Can it, Goodwin? Where's Wolfe?" "In the den, waiting to be impressed." Cramer stomped in and stopped short before Wolfe's desk. "You mind if I sit?" He didn't wait for permission. He just collapsed into a red chair. For once, Wolfe didn't object. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "you appear unwell. Would you like a stimulant?" "I'd like a new liver," Cramer muttered, then looked up. "I'm in a fix, Wolfe, a real one." I perched on the edge of my desk, watching the unthinkable unfold. Cramer, the bulldog of homicide, twisting his cigar and avoiding Wolfe's gaze. "I've been accused," he said. "Officially. A man named Lionel Dades filed a complaint with the district attorney, claiming I covered up a murder 3 years ago. Says I protected the killer." Wolfe's brows lifted 1/8 of an inch. "That is a remarkable assertion." "Yeah, remarkable enough to ruin me. The papers will have it by morning. The brass want me to stay quiet, let internal affairs handle it, but I can't. This stinks of politics, and Dade's a crank. I need someone outside the department to nail him before he nails me." I couldn't resist. "So, you've decided to join the private sector?" He shot me a look that could have melted varnish. Wolfe, unperturbed, leaned back slightly. "Explain this alleged murder." Cramer drew in a shaky breath. Howard Loring, contractor, found dead in his car 3 years ago. Gunshot wound. We ruled it suicide. The gun was his. Prints matched. Motive clear. The city was auditing his books, and he'd lost a pile of dough. Dade says it was murder, and that I took a payoff to bury it. Did you? Wolfe asked very softly. Cramer's jaw tightened. No, damn it. You know me better. Wolfe's tone was calm, almost kind. Yes, I do. That stopped the clock for a second. I'd seen Wolfe defend people before, but never a cop. Fritz arrived just then with a tray, coffee, sandwiches, and the kind of Swiss efficiency that makes you ashamed of your own pulse rate. Cramer ignored the food, though he looked like he could use a sandwich or 3. Why, Wolfe asked, does this man, Dade, resurface now? No idea. He was a city clerk back then. Small fry. Got canned after the investigation. I heard he went west, but now he's back waving paper. Paper? A complaint letter. Says he's got proof the case was fixed. He's giving interviews tomorrow. Pfui, Wolfe muttered. Proof, indeed. May I assume your superiors will not permit you to confront him directly? They told me to keep my mouth shut. Wise advice, which you have wisely ignored by coming here. Cramer grunted again, but there was gratitude in the sound. Look, Wolfe, I know how this sounds. You and I have crossed swords 100 times, but you've always been straight. If you can dig into this and prove Dade's lying, I'll pay whatever your fee is. That was Wolfe's cue. His eyes half closed, his fingers formed a steeple. My fee, he said, for the vindication of an officer's integrity is $5,000, payable in advance. Cramer blinked. You'd take a case like this? For me? For the truth, Wolfe corrected, and because I detest slander. It is the coward's substitute for murder. I watched the colour climb back into Cramer's face, though not entirely from relief. $5,000 it is, he said gruffly, reaching for his checkbook. You'll get every file you need, and I'll stay out of your way. That, Wolfe said, would be a novelty. While Cramer wrote, Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will in the morning obtain all available public records concerning Mr. Loring's demise. Begin with the Gazette's archives. I nodded. And Dade? For the moment, leave him to his conscience, if he possesses one. Cramer's pen scratched furiously. He hasn't. He's a snake, but he's smart enough to make me look dirty. Fritz cleared the cups quietly, his shoes whispering on the rug. The clock chimed 10. Wolfe accepted the cheque with a nod and placed it in the desk drawer. You understand, Inspector, that once I accept a commission, I am its master. You may not dictate my method or my pace. Cramer puffed the cigar, grimaced. As long as the end's clean. Good. Then we are colleagues of a sort. That nearly made Cramer choke on smoke. Colleagues, he muttered, if that's what you call it. Wolfe poured himself fresh coffee. Tell me, what precisely did Dade allege in his complaint? That I accepted a bribe from Councilman Russell Vanneck to hush up the murder. He says Vanneck and Loring were in a graft racket, public contracts, kickbacks, all that rot. Dade claims Loring threatened to expose him and got shot for it. And where is Councilman Vanneck now? Still sitting on the council, big shot, rich friends. Wolfe's eyes brightened. Indeed, that explains the district attorney's caution. They will tread softly. Political men always do. Cramer ground the cigar butt into the ashtray. You'll take it then? I already have. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. Archie will see you out. Cramer rose, slower now, the anger worn down to fatigue. At the door he stopped and turned. Wolfe, Thanks. I wouldn't have believed I'd ever come here like this. Nor would I, Wolfe said. But necessity makes strangers kin. Outside in the hall, Cramer paused again, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Goodwin, he said, if this backfires... It won't, I told him. If Wolfe's on the job, the only thing that'll burn is somebody's reputation, and it won't be yours. He gave a short grunt that might have been a laugh, then headed down the steps into the night. When I went back into the office, Wolfe was still seated, the lamplight glinting off the glass in his hand. He didn't look up. Archie, he said, our guest is a man of integrity, but his temperament is combustible. Handle him gently. Sure, I said, like a loaded pistol with a broken safety. He didn't smile, but the corners of his mouth twitched. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Bring me the newspaper files and avoid unnecessary speculation. Yes, sir, only the necessary kind. He waved me off. Pfui, go to bed. As I turned toward the stairs, I glanced back. The office looked like a stage after the actors had gone. The smoke drifting, the lamp throwing long shadows, Wolfe motionless in his chair. If there's anything stranger than a cop begging Nero Wolfe for absolution, I haven't met it yet. When a cop starts asking Wolfe for absolution, you know the city's turned upside down. If you ever want to test your faith in civilization, try reading 15 years of Gazette crime files in one sitting. By the time I hit 1947, I was half blind, half caffeinated, and fully convinced that murder was the city's favourite indoor sport. Lon Cohen had cleared me a corner at the Gazette morgue, a long table that smelled like glue, ink, and despair. Loring Howard, I told him. City contractor, alleged suicide, 3 years back. Give me everything that doesn't have gravy stains on it. Lon squinted. You're working for Wolfe on this Cramer mess, huh? Working for Wolfe, yes. On Cramer, no. At least that's the official story. He grinned, slid a stack of folders toward me, and went back to his typewriter. I started digging. There it was, in black and smudge. City contractor, found dead in car. Officials call it suicide. The photo showed Loring slumped in a sedan, mouth half open, gun on the seat like a bad joke. The copy said he'd been under audit for discrepancies in municipal contracts, that his wife identified the body, and that Inspector Cramer personally closed the file after the coroner's report. What the story didn't say was who benefited from those discrepancies. That little omission smelled like old fish. 2 side columns caught my eye, one about a missing city clerk named Lionel Dade, and another about Councilman Russell Vannick's sudden new mansion in Riverdale. I didn't need Wolfe's brain to draw a dotted line between them, but it helped. By noon, I'd filled 3 pages of notes and 2 lungs with newsprint dust. Lon leaned over. You want a sandwich? You look like you've been embalmed. I'll take a rain check. I've got a clerk to find. Dade's name didn't turn up in the phone book, but a friendly girl at city personnel owed me for getting her brother out of a parking ticket. She said he'd once rented an office on East 43rd near 3rd Avenue, back when the neighbourhood was full of paper pushers and cut-rate private eyes. I headed that way, wondering if Dade was the kind who confessed over coffee, or the kind who shot first and regretted later. The building was 5 stories of peeling paint and lost ambition. The directory still had Dade's name on a tin slot, painted over twice but legible if you squinted. The elevator was on strike, so I took the stairs. When I knocked, the door gave under my hand and swung open with a sigh. Inside, the place looked like it had been abandoned during Prohibition. 1 desk, 1 chair, and a calendar from 1949 curling on the wall. The air had the kind of stale chill you only get from unpaid rent. A man sat behind the desk, thin as a question mark, eyes darting like mice. Who are you?" he stammered. "My name's Goodwin. I'm working a case involving a fellow named Loring. You were a clerk in his office, weren't you?" He swallowed hard. "That was years ago. Why are you here?" "To ask why you've been accusing Inspector Cramer of homicide." That landed. His hands trembled. "Because it's true. You think I'm crazy, don't you? They all do. But I saw what happened." I gave him the look I usually reserve for elevator operators who tell me they're full. "What you saw, Mr. Dade, was a coroner's report." He leaned forward, whispering fiercely. "Loring didn't kill himself. He was silenced. Cramer took money from Vannick to call it suicide." That was the line I'd been expecting, and it didn't ring any truer the second time. "Got proof?" I asked. He hesitated, then reached into a drawer. My hand tensed automatically, but he only pulled out an envelope, crumpled reddish stains along the edge. "This is all that's left," he said. "They're still watching me." "Who's they?" He looked at the door as if it might answer. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me. I'm paid to believe unbelievable things." He opened his mouth, then froze. Something in the hallway creaked. He bolted up, shoved the envelope toward me, and lunged past before I could block him. By the time I hit the stairs, he was gone, vanished into the street traffic like a nervous rumour. I went back inside and took a look around. The desk drawers were empty except for some unpaid bills, an empty gin bottle, and dust thick enough to serve cocktails on. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket and locked the door behind me. Habit from too many setups. Back in the taxi, I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, 8 by 10, glossy. It showed Howard Loring shaking hands with Councilman Vanek on the steps of City Hall, both smiling like cats in the creamery. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had scrawled, Project number 187, final payment. A smear of dried blood crossed the corner. Whether it came from Dade or history, I didn't know yet. When I reached the brownstone, it was just past 3, and Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids. I resisted the temptation to break the no interruptions rule. Instead, I parked at my desk, typed up a brief memo, and examined the photo under the lamp. The handshake looked rehearsed, not friendly. Maybe I was reading too much into it, but the shadows around their smiles had a public relations odour. I was halfway through my notes when the elevator hummed. Wolfe emerged, moving with the grace of a well-fed glacier. "You have returned early," he observed. "Define early. I've read 6 miles of newsprint, tracked a city ghost and lost him in rush hour. That's about average for a Thursday." He lowered himself into his chair. "Report." I gave it to him straight, minus the wisecracks. Dade, the office, the envelope, the photo. When I finished, he held out a hand. I passed the photograph over. He studied it without comment, then used the magnifier. The inscription, Project 187, suggests a municipal contract. Vanek's domain, no doubt. The blood is recent? Within a week, maybe. Dade was nervous enough to spring for new stains daily. "Pfui, the man is a fool, but perhaps a useful one. You saw no evidence of others following him?" "Only paranoia. Though to be fair, paranoia in this town usually has an address." He gave me one of those glances that measures how much of my vocabulary he's willing to tolerate. "The photograph is intriguing, but incomplete. We must learn what became of Project 187 and whether it connects to the alleged embezzlement. You will consult Saul Panzer in the morning." "Sure. Shall I tell him to bring a flashlight and a prayer book?" Wolfe ignored that. "Did you question Dade regarding his source?" I tried. He skipped before the credits. "Then he will reappear, if he lives." That wasn't the most comforting forecast, but coming from Wolfe it counted as optimism. He leaned back, eyes half closed. "Archie, corruption is like mildew. It thrives in darkness and pretends to be mere dampness. The task is illumination." I couldn't resist. "I'll get a brighter bulb." That earned me the faintest growl. "Your levity is maladroit. Yet," he sighed, "it lightens tedium." Which, from Nero Wolfe, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. He motioned toward the door. "Fritz will have beer. Bring mine chilled, yours whatever pleases you. Then type a memorandum summarizing your interview, to be dispatched to Inspector Cramer tomorrow. He must be apprised, though not consoled." "Right. And the photograph?" "Place it in the safe. Its existence may provoke further folly from Mr. Dade, or from others less visible." I did as told, locking the safe while Wolfe rang for Fritz. The familiar smell of hops and cold glass soon followed. Fritz appeared, bearing the tray like a man escorting royalty. As Wolfe lifted the beer, I leaned on the desk. "You think Dade's telling the truth?" "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that he believes it. That is both a virtue and a danger. Maybe he just wants a spotlight." He looked ready for his close-up, without makeup. "Then he will have it," Wolfe murmured. "Fools often light the path to wisdom." The clock ticked, the streetcars rattled beyond the window, and I thought again of Dade's eyes, wild, hunted, too bright for comfort. He might have been lying through his teeth, but one thing was sure. Somebody wanted him scared, and he was obliging beautifully. As Wolfe raised his glass, I added, "He looked like a man trying to keep his conscience in a broom closet." Wolfe sipped. "Aptly put. And broom closets, like secrets, rarely remain closed." He nodded once, dismissing me, and turned his gaze toward the window where the lamplight glowed against the curtain folds. The office felt smaller, the air thicker. Outside, the city kept humming, dirty, alive, and, as always, ready for its next ghost. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the city had gone grey at the edges, the kind of late afternoon where even the traffic seems to yawn. I'd been expecting applause for effort, maybe even a word of paternal pride from Wolfe. What I got instead was an indictment for independent thought. He was at his desk, the famous yellow chair tilted just enough to suggest both comfort and disdain. The photograph lay before him like evidence in the trial of Archie Goodwin versus the Great Wolfe. The air smelled of the orchids from upstairs. He'd just come down from his evening session, which meant I was catching him mid-mood, halfway between botanist and despot. "So," he said, not looking up, "you have been trespassing upon hysteria without my sanction." I dropped my hat on the stand. "I call it legwork. You call it trespassing. Civilization advances on such disagreements." He finally looked up, eyes heavy-lidded but sharp enough to slice ham. "You went to this Dade creature's office. You startled him. He fled. And in the process, you risked alarming any associates he may possess." "He didn't seem to have associates, unless you count the wallpaper. He left this behind." I nudged the photograph closer. Wolfe made a small sound, half grunt, half sigh, and took up his magnifier. "Loring shaking hands with Councilman Russell Vanneck," he murmured. "The same Vanneck whose name Inspector Cramer so reluctantly pronounced last night." "Reluctantly's putting it mild," I said. "Cramer looked like a man swallowing a porcupine." Wolfe ignored me. His eyes narrowed on the back of the photo, where faint pencil markings traced a few letters and an address. "Hoboken," he said softly. "Odd. That is not a district for political photography." Maybe they were doing a charity shoot. City Hall cleans up the waterfront. I'd buy tickets. That earned me a glare. "Archie, cease your puerilities. The address may indicate storage, or a meeting place, or a conduit for bribes. The ink is recent." I tilted my head. "You can tell that from there?" "I can tell," he said, "because your fingerprints are smudged over it. When next you touch a clue, use the edges." That was Wolfe's version of a love tap. I might have fired back, but the doorbell saved me. At 5:26 sharp, Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face announcing the name before his mouth did. "Inspector Cramer, sir." "Show him in," Wolfe said, as though he'd been expecting him since birth. Cramer came in with less thunder than usual, coat unbuttoned, cigar clamped but unlit. He looked 10 pounds lighter in temper, but 20 heavier in fatigue. "All right, Wolfe, you wanted me to identify something." "I did not want you to," Wolfe corrected. "I anticipated it might become necessary." He gestured at the photograph. "You will recognize both figures." Cramer leaned over it, puffing out a breath. "Yeah, Loring and Councilman Vanneck. That shot was in the Gazette about 3 months before Loring died. You're not thinking Vanneck pulled the trigger himself, are you?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that appearances rarely justify assumptions. The question is why Mr. Dade possessed this photograph, blood-stained, and what significance the Hoboken address holds." Cramer frowned. "Hoboken? Never came up in the case." "Precisely," Wolfe murmured, "which recommends it for examination." Cramer straightened, pacing a few steps. "Look, I told you I'd help, but this stays off the record. I've already got half the department whispering that I'm hiring private gumshoes to scrub my conscience." I leaned back in my chair. "We prefer confidential consultants. It sounds classier." Cramer shot me a glare, then turned back to Wolfe. "What do you want?" "Access," Wolfe said simply. "Your complete file on Loring. Autopsy, witness statements, ledger summaries, everything. And any material concerning Dade's dismissal from city service." "That's police property." "So are you," Wolfe replied calmly. "But I am not asking to publish them. I am asking to read them. If I am to vindicate you, I require ammunition." Cramer's hand tightened around the cigar. "You'll keep this discreet." Wolfe folded his hands. "Inspector, discretion is my craft. Though," he added, eyes glinting, "I make no promises about Archie." "Hey," I said, "I can be discreet." Wolfe gave a sniff. "Your notion of discretion, Archie, involves telling fewer than 3 reporters." Cramer almost smiled. "He's right. If this leaks, I'm sunk. I'll have Sergeant Stebbins bring the files over tomorrow morning." "Good," Wolfe said. "At 9:30 precisely." Cramer blinked. 9:30? What's wrong with 8? "At 8, Wolfe said, I breakfast. At 9, I tend orchids. At 9:30, I may contemplate corruption." That brought the first genuine snort from Cramer all day. "You're a piece of work, Wolfe." "Thank you," Wolfe said gravely. For a moment, nobody spoke. The clock ticked loud enough to audition for a metronome. Cramer finally lit his cigar, and the office filled with that aromatic haze that made Wolfe's nostrils twitch. He reached for the bell cord. "Fritz, bring beer." Cramer waved it off. Not for me. I'm on duty. Then allow me to indulge, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin? Don't mind if I do, I said, just to be companionable. Fritz arrived with the tray, 2 chilled glasses, the usual ritual. Cramer watched the performance like a man inspecting a foreign religion. You really think Vanek had something to do with this? He asked. I think, Wolfe said, that Vanek's name is too powerful and his enmity toward Loring too public to be coincidence. The audit that precipitated Loring's disgrace was instigated by Vanek's office. Cramer grunted. That doesn't mean he shot the man. Of course not. It merely means he had cause to prefer Loring silent, I added, and Dade might have known something worth killing for. Cramer gave me a look that could have cracked walnuts. That's a hell of a leap, Goodwin. I leap economically, I said. Wolfe can clean up the landing. Wolfe set his glass down with a faint click. Archie's exuberance aside, the premise is logical. Someone feared disclosure. Whether that fear was justified or not, 2 men are now dead. Cramer's shoulders sagged. All right, Wolfe, you'll get your look at the files, but you keep my name out of your reports, understand? Utterly. You are invisible. Wolfe leaned back, eyelids drooping. For the record, Inspector, I appreciate your candour. It is refreshing among the constabulary. Cramer muttered, Don't make me regret it. Regret, Wolfe said, is a luxury of the innocent. You, being only accused, may still hope. That was Wolfe's version of a handshake. Cramer pocketed the photograph, hesitated, and put it back on the desk. No, he said, you keep it. I don't want anyone seeing me walk out with your property. I'll have the files sent over tomorrow. He started toward the door, stopped and turned to me. Goodwin, keep your nose clean. This Dade business stinks enough. I'm scented with integrity, I told him. Ask around. He grunted and left. The door shut with the finality of a man walking into bad weather. Wolfe sipped his beer, eyes half-lidded. Archie. Sir. See that the photograph is stored in the safe, and transcribe your report of Dade's office before dinner. Accuracy may soon matter. I nodded, heading for the safe. When Wolfe agrees to keep anything discreet, it usually means half of Manhattan will know by lunch. Wolfe's head tilted just enough to register offence. My discretion is surgical. Yours is conversational. I aim to please, I said, locking the safe. He made a sound deep in his throat, a cross between a growl and a chuckle. Pfui, attend to your report. As the typewriter began its rhythm, Fritz reappeared to announce dinner. Wolfe rose slowly, adjusting his waistcoat, and murmured, Boundaries, Archie. Between law and truth. We walk them now. I looked up from the keys. Yeah, and if we trip, Cramer's badge won't cushion the fall. He grunted agreement and left for the dining room, his footsteps deliberate as always. I finished the page, listening to the typewriter echo fade into the smell of beer and cigar smoke. Whatever lines Wolfe had drawn, they were starting to blur, and I had a feeling Hoboken was where they'd cross. There's a particular kind of chill that comes off the Hudson after dark. It's not just cold, it's personal. That's what Saul and I walked into at 10:45 that night, the river fog sneaking around the piers like it had business of its own. The address from the back of the photograph had turned out to be a warehouse crouched between a defunct ferry slip and a pile of rotting pilings. City property, the kind nobody remembers until someone gets indicted. The sign on the chain-link fence said Department of Municipal Storage, which was bureaucratese for graveyard of forgotten junk. Saul had his hands in his coat pockets, flat cap low. He looked like he was out for a stroll in the world's least scenic park. You sure about this, Archie? He murmured. The place smells like a perjury charge. That's why we brought matches, I told him. If Vanek's been stashing old ghosts, this is where they'll be haunting. We slipped through a gap in the fence. Someone had already peeled the wire back. Inside, the air was a blend of oil, mildew, and civic neglect. A single light bulb dangled near the loading dock, giving the place just enough illumination to ruin your night vision. I found a door marked Office. It groaned open like it hadn't had company since the Coolidge administration. Inside was a desk, 2 dented file cabinets, and the kind of dust that settles only when it's certain no one's coming back. Saul flipped open his penlight and swept it along the labels. One drawer was scrawled in faded pencil. Loring. I whistled softly. There's our boy. Or what's left of him, Saul said. I pulled the handle. It resisted, then gave way with a shriek that woke the echoes. Inside, nothing. Just the bare metal rails where files had been, and a faint square of clean surface that said someone had been here recently, removing something worth removing. I took out the camera I'd borrowed from Lon Cohen's office, flashbulbs the size of grenades, and started snapping. Saul turned up a cigarette butt still fresh enough to be insulting. He looked at it, sniffed, and shook his head. Turkish blend. You don't get that from warehouse guards on city pay. Maybe the city's improving benefits. He grunted, then froze. Someone's coming. Footsteps echoed from the loading dock. Heavy, steady, no hurry. A man in a dark overcoat and cap appeared, flashlight in one hand, billy club in the other. His badge read Security Division, Municipal Storage. He squinted at us. What the hell are you doing here? I smiled my best civil service smile. Inspectors, Division of Records Preservation. You're 2 years overdue on your index logs. He frowned. Never heard of that division. Congratulations, I said. You're now enlightened. That didn't soothe him. This place is restricted. Orders from Vanek's office, nobody allowed after 6. At the name, Saul's eyebrows barely twitched. A full-page headline in Saul Panzer body language. I shrugged like it was news to me. Vanek, huh? Must be one of those citywide initiatives. You'd better show us where the key logs are so we can update our report. No dice. The guard moved closer. You two get out now. Saul stepped forward, voice mild. We will. Mind if I smoke first? The guard hesitated, measuring him. I was already packing up the camera, playing harmless. Fine, he said finally, but make it quick. I don't like strangers nosing around. He followed us to the door, watching until we crossed the lot. Saul flicked the cigarette into the fog. You catch that? He murmured. Orders from Vanek's office. That's not just small fry talk. No, Saul said, and he's not just a night watchman. He's too clean. I looked back at the warehouse. The bulb above the dock swung in the breeze, the light stuttering like it was nervous. You think he's our removal man? Could be. I'll tail him. You go report before Wolfe starts timing your heartbeat. I didn't argue. You don't tell Saul Panzer how to do shadows. You just get out of his way. By the time I reached the cab stand at 11th and Washington, the fog was thicker than a Tammany promise. I gave the driver Wolfe's address and let the heater fight for its life. When I got home, the brownstone looked reassuringly normal. Warm light, drawn curtains, a faint whiff of Fritz's late-night baking drifting from the kitchen. Wolfe was in the office, reading a pamphlet on soil acidity like it contained the secret of the universe. He didn't look up. Archie, you smell of fog and disrepute. Compliments noted, I said. We found your Hoboken hideout. Empty drawers, missing files, and one talkative guard who says he's taking orders from Vanek. That got his attention. His head lifted half an inch. Orders? His word. Said nobody's allowed near the place after 6. I got photos. Show them. I handed him the envelope of prints. He examined them, pausing at the one with the Loring label. The drawer rails are clean, recently disturbed. Did you handle them? With gloves, but I brushed one edge accidentally. Sorry, boss, he frowned. I shall overlook it since you are accompanied by Mr. Panzer. I grinned. And a good thing. Saul's tailing the guard. He says the man's too neat for a warehouse stiff. Indeed. What did he say his name was? He didn't, and I didn't press. He was already half a hair from tossing us out. Wolfe made a low sound. Pleasure or disapproval, hard to tell. Archie, if Councilman Vanek truly has men guarding the ghosts of his dealings, then we are not merely pursuing history, we are disturbing it. I'll bring a broom next time. Phooey. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Go to bed. We shall wait for Mr. Panzer's report. I had just turned toward the stairs when the phone rang. Wolfe pointed at it like a judge assigning guilt. I picked up. Goodwin. Saul's voice came through, quiet and crisp. I tailed him to a diner on 10th Avenue. Guess who showed up? Dade. They talked for 15 minutes, then the guard handed him a briefcase and left. Dade took a cab south. I felt Wolfe's gaze on me. Saul, you sure? Positive. I got the cab number. Good. Stay clear till morning. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. Dade's back in the picture. He just collected a briefcase from our friendly guard. Wolfe's eyes opened wider than usual, a full 1/8 of an inch. A briefcase. How elegant. Its contents will likely determine the next corpse. That's cheerful. He shut his eyes again. Archie, draft a memorandum before breakfast, and see that the photographs are filed. When I awake, I will wish to see them in order, not in chaos. I nodded, heading for the desk. The typewriter keys felt cold against my fingers as I started the report. Outside, the fog kept pressing against the windows like a patient creditor. If ghosts kept offices, this one had lousy ventilation. Morning in the brownstone usually smells like coffee, toast, and Fritz's quiet triumph over cholesterol. That day, it smelled like scandal. I came down the stairs with the Gazette in hand, and before I even reached the office, the headline hit Wolfe in the face like a flying brick. Lionel Dade found dead. Suicide. Wolfe's lips compressed until they practically disappeared. Phooey, he muttered, which in his private language means somewhere between idiots and apocalypse. I laid the paper on his desk. Front page, above the fold. If you ever wanted free publicity, this is it. They've connected Dade, Loring, and Cramer with a nice little bow. The city's eating popcorn. Confound it, Wolfe said, rising a half-inch in his chair. The fool could not even die privately. Before I could reply, a commotion outside turned the air to static. Reporters, no doubt. The brownstone had been besieged since dawn. I caught a glimpse through the curtain. A dozen hats bobbing, notebooks flapping, and one bright camera flash reflecting off the door like artillery. The bell rang. Fritz's voice floated from the hall. "Inspector Cramer, sir." I didn't need a clock to tell me the man had been up all night. Cramer entered like a thunderhead in human form. Red eyes, jaw set, cigar unlit for once. "You've seen the paper," he said. "Yes," Wolfe answered mildly. "So has the city." Cramer slammed the Gazette onto the desk. "They're making me the villain. 2 dead, both tied to cases I handled, and that," he jabbed a finger at the headline, "makes it look like I drove him to it." Wolfe studied him, calm as an undertaker. "And did you?" "Hell no." "Then bluster less. Sit down." Wolfe gestured at the red chair. Cramer didn't so much sit as collapse. His hands clenched around his hat. "The DA's breathing down my neck. They found a note next to Dade's body, typed, unsigned, no fingerprints. Suicide, they say. I say it stinks." I leaned on the desk. "Where was he found?" "Rooming house on West 25th. Door locked from the inside. Gunshot to the head. Same brand pistol as Loring's." "Convenient symmetry," Wolfe murmured. "Too damn convenient," Cramer shot back. "But I can't prove anything without the briefcase Saul Panzer saw. You sent him on that, didn't you?" Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, you will retrieve it. At once." That was the signal tone, the quiet, unarguable command that meant he'd already decided the course of the day, and anyone who questioned it could find new employment. Cramer leaned forward, voice rough. "You're still in this, Wolfe? You'll help me see this through?" Wolfe's gaze lifted from the paper, steady and cold. "Inspector, we are not priests. We are empiricists. We work with facts, not remorse. If this is suicide, the facts will prove it. If it is murder—" "Then I'm clear," Cramer said, almost pleading. "Then," Wolfe corrected, "someone has gone to great effort to destroy your reputation. In either case, indulgence in emotion is wasteful." Cramer nodded once, jaw working. "I'll get you the typed note. The lab found nothing, not even smudges. Whoever did it wore gloves." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "And the typewriter?" "Police issue Remington. Too common to trace." "Phooey," Wolfe said again, more softly. "You should at least be gratified. It takes intellect to fabricate a farce this symmetrical." Cramer snorted, rose, and stabbed the cigar into his mouth. "Gratified, my foot. I'll send over the note. You find that briefcase. I've got a press mob waiting to ask if I moonlight as a killer." As he headed for the door, I said, "Smile for them, Inspector. You'll look better on the next front page." He stopped long enough to give me a glare that could have filed steel, then left without a word. The door thudded shut, and silence settled like smoke. Wolfe sighed, reached for the bell cord, and muttered, "Fritz, beer." When it arrived, he lifted the chilled glass with a gravity most men reserve for prayer. "Archie," he said, "fetch Saul Panzer. Have him deliver the briefcase here. If he resists, remind him that delay is the ally of deceit." I grabbed my hat. "Right, but if the press outside wants a quote, what should I say?" "Say," Wolfe murmured, That truth is impatient with mobs, and so am I. I grinned. That'll photograph beautifully. He gave me one long, warning look, the kind that could fold a newspaper man in half, and returned to his beer. I took the hint. As I stepped outside, the reporters surged forward, shouting questions about Cramer, Dade, and the case Wolfe was certainly about to solve. I pushed through them without answering, thinking how right Wolfe had been. Cramer did look like a man watching his badge go up in smoke. If money could hide guilt, Park Avenue would be the safest street in America. I stood in front of Ellen Loring's building that afternoon, eyeing a doorman with the kind of jaw that had once belonged to the Marines. He sized me up, decided I wasn't selling anything, and let me through after I mentioned the Gazette and a feature on civic widows. A little lie never hurt the Fourth Estate. The elevator smelled of orchids and floor polish. When I rang her bell, she opened the door herself, tall, poised, and wrapped in a mink that probably cost more than Fritz's annual grocery bill. Her eyes were blue and practiced. You could see the rehearsal in every blink. "Mrs. Loring," I said, showing my most harmless grin. "Archie Goodwin. I'm with Nero Wolfe." Her hand tightened on the doorknob. "Oh, Mr. Wolfe, I remember hearing about him when—" She stopped, regrouped. "Please, come in." The penthouse was half-packed. Suitcases stood open beside a stack of framed photographs wrapped in tissue. She saw me notice and smiled faintly. "A change of air," she said. "Palm Beach. I find the city oppressive lately." "I'd say it's mutual," I told her. "I won't keep you long, just a few questions about Lionel Dade." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Dade? I don't know anyone by that name." "That's strange. He seemed to know plenty about you, about your late husband too." She turned toward the window, the sunlight brushing her hair like a spotlight. "I forgave the past, Mr. Goodwin. My husband's death was ruled suicide. I accepted it. Why can't the world?" I followed her gaze. "Because the world's full of nosy people like me." She gave a polite laugh that didn't reach her eyes. On the piano behind her, something caught my attention, a silver frame, fresh polish gleaming. It was the same photograph Dade had dropped in that dusty office. Loring, shaking hands with Councilman Vanek, all civic virtue and toothy grins. Only this version looked newer, retouched, the background cleaner, the handshake crisper, the little ink mark on the back conveniently absent. "Nice shot," I said, stepping closer. "Your husband had friends in high places." Her shoulders stiffened. "It was taken at a dedication ceremony. City Hall wanted a record." "Sure. Always good to commemorate public service." I bent slightly, pretending to admire the piano keys while watching her reflection in the lacquer. She was watching me like a cat watches a rocking chair. "Do you play?" I asked. "Not anymore. My husband loved music." Her voice had the brittle edge of someone trying to close a door politely before it slams. I straightened. "You mentioned forgiveness. That takes talent. Most widows prefer justice." Her lips tightened. "Justice was served 3 years ago." "Maybe it's back for a second helping," I said. "Dade's dead now too." She flinched, barely, but it was there. The color drained from her face and came back like a bad radio signal. I read that in the paper. Terrible." "Yeah," I said, "terrible coincidence. You ever meet Councilman Vanek since your husband's funeral?" That did it. Her poise cracked just enough to show the scaffolding beneath. "Mr. Vanek was kind to me afterward," she said quickly. "He helped settle certain financial matters." "Generous man," I said. "Still helps the city where he can." Her eyes flicked to the photo again, then back to me. "If there's nothing else, Mr. Goodwin," I tipped my hat. "Nothing for now, but if you remember anything worth forgiving twice, call me." At the door I paused. "One more thing. Nice frame job on that picture. You should keep it somewhere safe. Things like that have a way of disappearing." She didn't answer. The door closed softly, the kind of sound silk would make if it could sigh. Out in the hall, I let out a low whistle. She had a smile you could butter toast with, and trust about as much. By 11 the next morning, the brownstone was quieter than a confession booth. That meant Wolfe was with his orchids, and the city could have burned down to bedrock without disturbing his routine. I used the time to type up Saul's report on the guard and the briefcase. Every so often I caught myself glancing at the closed door to the plant rooms, half expecting Wolfe to burst out in a cloud of orchid perfume and divine revelation. He didn't. At precisely 11, the elevator hummed, and he emerged in his usual post-botanical trance, eyes half shut, mind busy rearranging the cosmos. He crossed the office, sniffed the air, and said, "Coffee." I obliged. He took a sip, grimaced faintly, and announced, "Mrs. Loring's fear is a cipher, not an emotion." I looked up from the typewriter. "I'll look it up after dessert." "Imbecile," he said mildly. "A cipher hides meaning under appearance. Her fear conceals knowledge. It is deliberate, not reactive." "Then she deserves an Oscar. I was there. She looked scared enough to qualify for sainthood." He ignored me and reached for the stack of notes I'd left on his desk. His eyes flicked over them like a banker counting counterfeit bills. "The briefcase. Its recovery is imperative. Saul's on it. He's shadowing the diner route again tonight." "Good." Wolfe folded his hands. "Meanwhile, we will impose order upon chaos. Fetch the files." That meant another trip to the safe, which was Wolfe's idea of exercise by proxy. When I returned, he'd already pulled a yellow pad from his drawer and was sharpening a pencil with the gravity of a man carving commandments. "Take dictation," he said. I sat at the desk, fingers poised over the keys. 1. Russell Vannock's campaign contributions for the last 6 years, amounts, donors, and any municipal contracts awarded subsequently. 2. Lionel Dade's employment records, specifically dates of dismissal and any pension petitions. 3. The city auditor's files pertaining to Loring Construction, project number 187. 4. The bell in the dining room chimed softly, and Fritz appeared in the doorway, smiling the way only a man bearing roast capon can smile. "Lunch is ready, gentlemen." 4. Wolfe continued, unperturbed. "The typewritten notes found at both deaths. Inspector Cramer must be induced to permit comparison." "Shall I induce him before or after the soup?" I asked. Wolfe gave me a look. "You may eat first. Intelligence requires fuel." We adjourned to the dining room where Fritz had set the table like a general preparing for inspection. The capon sat centre stage, flanked by mushrooms and cream, asparagus, and a sauce that could have made a cynic weep. Wolfe settled in, inhaled deeply, and sighed. "The world," he declared, "is bearable so long as there is order, both on the plate and in the mind. Men err because they confuse appetite with anarchy." I poured the wine. "And what do you call what we've got? 2 suicides that don't match, a councilman with friends in low places, and a widow rehearsing sincerity." He carved a slice of capon. "Appetizers, Archie. You must not mistake the first course for the entree." "Fine," I said, "as long as dessert's not another corpse." He chewed thoughtfully. "You are facetious, but correct in essence. Deaths, like dishes, reveal themselves by sequence. The repetition of a pattern, type notes, identical phrasing, indicates artifice. Our murderer admires symmetry." "Or he just likes typewriters," I offered. "Fui, the common instrument of bureaucracy employed as tool of homicide. There is irony. The man uses the form of order to cloak disorder. That is what I mean when I say Mrs. Loring's fear is ciphered." I reached for another helping. She looked more like she was scared stiff of Vannock. "That too may be theatre," Wolfe said. "Guilt and terror share a vocabulary." He took a sip of wine. "But their grammar differs." That was the kind of remark that could either mean something profound or nothing at all. I chose to assume the latter and let him eat in peace. For 5 minutes, the only sound in the room was the steady rhythm of knife and fork, a tempo as measured as his thinking. Finally, he dabbed his lips and resumed. "We will let Saul complete his errand. You will, this afternoon, call upon Lon Cohen. Request the Gazette's photographic records of Councilman Vannock's campaigns. I wish to examine every public image in which Loring appears." "Sure," I said. "And if Lon asks why, what do I tell him? That we're starting a scrapbook?" "Tell him nothing. He will deduce the rest, and in doing so, spare us time." He signalled Fritz for coffee. As the tray arrived, Wolfe continued, "The city auditor's office will resist inquiry. You will present yourself as investigating a pending defamation suit, which is not entirely false. If they still obstruct, threaten subpoena. You know, someday the DA's office is going to start billing us rent for all this impersonation." Wolfe's eyes twinkled faintly. "Then we shall pay in information which is the only coin they respect. He sipped his coffee, then leaned back, the great head tilting in contemplation. Archie, these typed notes, both unsigned, both devoid of fingerprints, are the linchpin. Their uniformity betrays orchestration. A murderer who delights in neatness often trusts too much in repetition. He forgets that symmetry is sterile. Life is not. You mean he's neat but dumb? Precisely. The vice of perfection. I couldn't help grinning. I'll quote you on that next time you correct my typing. He allowed a ghost of a smile. You may, if you survive. Fritz cleared the dishes, silent as snowfall. The room grew warm with the after-lunch quiet that usually preceded Wolfe's return to the orchids. He looked almost content, which in his case means the universe was momentarily acceptable. I leaned back. So, what's our next move, Maestro? Wait for Saul to bring home the briefcase or rattle Vanek's cage? Neither, he said. We observe. A hunter who shakes the tree too soon loses the quarry. Fine, but if the hunter sits too long, the quarry joins another jungle. He waved a hand. Your metaphors are appalling. Go to your typewriter and compose memoranda for Mr. Panzer and Inspector Cramer. Precision, Archie. And when you have finished, you may indulge your restlessness with Mr. Cohen. That was dismissal, velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. I stood, stretched, and nodded to Fritz on my way out. Wolfe rose slower, like a mountain reconsidering erosion. As I crossed the office, I heard him behind me, calling softly, Archie. I turned. Take care, he said. The man who arranges deaths in sequence may wish to complete his pattern. I gave him a half grin. I'll keep out of alphabetical order. His eyes closed, satisfied. Do so. He turned toward the elevator, bound for his orchids and silence. I watched the doors close, thinking how he chewed the capon and the case with equal precision, and how both, sooner or later, would end up bones on the plate. You can tell a man's nerves by the way he handles his paperclips. Myron Hodge had them lined up like soldiers facing court-martial. He sat behind a walnut desk that was too big for his courage, the gold chain of his vest twitching every time I asked a question. Mr. Goodwin, he said, running a finger around his collar. I told your Mr. Wolfe everything I know. I handled the accounts. The books balanced. Sure they did, I said, and so did the city contracts, until someone leaned on them. Saul Panzer traced Dade to your firm. Funny coincidence, since Dade's now in a morgue and you're still vertical. He winced. That's horrible. Yeah, he was a terrible conversationalist even before he got shot. But let's keep it on topic. Dade worked for you and Loring. Funds disappeared. Then Loring died. Now Dade's gone. That's a line of arithmetic even I can follow. Hodge dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief scented like a flower shop on payday. You don't understand. Loring was reckless. He advanced city money to people he shouldn't have. Dade found out. Found out and cashed in? A faint squeak escaped him. He had letters, private correspondence between Loring and Councilman Vanek. He said if I didn't pay, he'd show them to the Gazette. I paid. For years. That was enough to earn a raised eyebrow. You're a generous soul. Mind if I see one of those letters? He shook his head fast enough to fan the paperwork. I burned them last month, all but one. I was going to... He stopped, eyes darting toward a drawer. Going to what? Return it, he said. To Vanek. I want it out. He pulled a single envelope from the drawer, yellowed and trembling in his hand. The paper smelled of stale smoke and guilt. Here, he whispered. Before I could take it, the office phone rang. He jumped. Excuse me, he said and picked up. Yes? What? But I... Whatever came next drowned in the roar that followed. The desk heaved like a kicked mule, the windows shattered inward, and I was suddenly doing a dance I hadn't rehearsed. The blast slammed me sideways into the filing cabinet. When I hit the floor, the air was thick with dust, fire, and the sweet perfume of cooked varnish. Someone was yelling outside. I rolled, coughing, and crawled toward the door through what used to be Hodge's business model. The doorframe hung like a drunk. Hodge himself, well, he'd cashed out of the firm. Permanently. Down on the street, smoke poured from the third-floor windows, and a siren somewhere decided to get heroic. A patrolman shouted about gas lines and negligence. I left my name as a witness and made my retreat before they could decide witnesses were responsible parties. 2 blocks away, I found a scrap clinging to my coat sleeve, a singed corner of that letter Hodge had waved. just enough left to read a few words. Project Loring Vanek. Payment. The rest was confetti. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my hair smelled like barbecue and my suit had seen better explosions. Wolfe took one look at me over his book and groaned. "Archie, have you been cavorting with pyrotechnics?" "Only professionally," I said. "Hodge's office just redecorated itself with high explosives. He's dead. Gas leak, the cops say." "Phooey," Wolfe said, closing the book. "Accidents are the coward's device. Someone feared revelation." I dropped the charred scrap on his desk. "That's all that's left, enough to keep Saul busy and Cramer unhappy." He stared at it, then at me. "You still have your eyebrows?" "Barely," I said, "but in this business that counts as profit." By 9 that morning, the brownstone felt like a fortress surrounded by barbarians with notebooks. The Gazette had dropped its bomb at dawn, an editorial suggesting Nero Wolfe, famed orchid fancier and private egotist, was shielding corrupt city officials from exposure. By breakfast, every wire service in town had copied it, and even the milkman wanted a quote. Fritz served my eggs with a look that said he'd sooner feed lions. Outside, the press corps had taken up permanent residence on the stoop, shouting questions every time a curtain twitched. I was debating whether to answer the phone or throw it out the window when Wolfe's voice rolled in from the office. "Archie, bring the Gazette, and close that window before I'm forced to smell the mob." I carried in the paper. Wolfe sat at his desk in his yellow chair, the picture of calm disdain, but the set of his jaw could have cracked walnuts. He unfolded the Gazette with surgical care, read the first paragraph, and let out a sound that made "phooey" sound affectionate. "Listen to this," I said. "Sources suggest the celebrated detective's private loyalties may impede justice in the Dade Loring affair. That's you, boss. The paper's decided you're the villain of the week." "Imbeciles," he said softly. "Public vilification is the bath of intellect. It cleanses the skin, though it seldom improves the odor." I grinned. "You want me to issue a statement?" He glared. "Silence is preferable to the idiocies of self-defense. The moment I acknowledge their drivel, I dignify it." Before I could answer, the doorbell clanged like a summons from Olympus. Fritz appeared with an expression of long-suffering and announced, "Inspector Cramer." Cramer came in looking like a man being followed by his own obituary. His cigar was chewed to a stump, his coat open, and the circles under his eyes could have passed for bruises. "Wolfe," he barked. "I'm catching it from every direction. The Commissioner, the DA, my own men. You've made me look like I'm in bed with City Hall." "Impossible," Wolfe said. "The bed would collapse." Cramer's jaw worked. "You think this is funny? That editorial's poison. I've got orders to keep my distance until you clarify your involvement. If that means pulling the files, I'll do it." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You will do nothing so foolish. The truth will survive without your department's nervous interference." "You don't get it," Cramer snapped. "My name's on both cases. 2 deaths, now a building explosion, and a newspaper screaming conspiracy. If I stay tied to you, I'll be out of a badge by next week." "Then resign with dignity," Wolfe said. "A badge so fragile deserves retirement." For a second I thought Cramer might lunge across the desk, but he just exhaled hard, smoke curling around the edges of his fury. "You make everything sound easy. Well, here's a tip before I go. There's still one witness alive from the original Loring inquest. A stenographer named Rose Kelter. She might remember something you'll find useful. That's the last favor you'll get from me." He turned for the door. I said, "Hey, Inspector, tell the boys outside we're out of statements." He grunted. "They'll print your silence anyway." Then he was gone, the cigar trail lingering like a signature. Wolfe stared at the Gazette again, then folded it with the same precision funeral directors use for flags. "Archie," he said, "inform Saul Pantzer to locate Miss Kelter. I shall be unavailable until dinner." "You're hiding from the press?" "Hardly. I am retreating," he said, rising, "to think amid organisms less pernicious." He meant the orchids. The elevator door slid shut behind him, leaving the office smelling of tobacco, ink, and wounded dignity. I sat down at the desk, picked up the phone, and glared at its constant ringing. Reporters, City Hall, cranks. It was going to be a long day. Even the milkman was asking for statements. Rain in the Bronx sounds different from rain in Manhattan. Downtown it's sophisticated, part of the soundtrack. Up here it's personal, a reminder that roofs leak and radiators wheeze. I stood outside a narrow brick boarding house with a name that had once been the Armitage, but now looked like the Arm. The landlady had told me room 3B was the typist lady, keeps to herself, nice manners, pays in cash. That was enough for a start. I knocked. A woman's voice called, cautious but not unfriendly. Yes, who is it? Archie Goodwin, miss. I come bearing ginger ale and curiosity in that order. There was a pause, a chain sliding back, and then the door opened halfway. Rose Kelter wasn't old exactly, but her eyes were the sort that have seen the same disappointment more than once. She wore a plain grey sweater and held herself like a stenographer who never stopped expecting dictation. Mr. Goodwin, she said, half question, half warning. That's me. You were at the Loring inquest 3 years ago. You took the testimony, and Inspector Cramer tells me your memory's better than most filing cabinets. Her lips twitched. Cramer remembered me. Cramer forgets nothing that causes him pain. I held up the bottle. May I come in, or shall we toast through the keyhole? She hesitated, then stepped aside. The room was clean but tired, lace curtains yellowed by time, a small table under a lamp, and a Remington typewriter with a cracked space bar sitting on the dresser like a retired soldier. Rain tapped the window in even strokes, an impatient metronome. Sit, Mr. Goodwin. I'll get glasses. I haven't had company since— She stopped, then shrugged. Since before Dade came around asking questions. That name hung in the air like the smell of burnt coffee. You knew him? Everyone at the courthouse knew Dade. He was loud about his secrets, thought he could make a living selling them. She poured the ginger ale, hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. He came here a month ago. Wanted to know if I still had my shorthand notes from the inquest. Did you? No. I turned them in, like we all did. But he said there'd been alterations. Said someone had leaned on him. I leaned forward. Vanek. Her eyes flicked up fast. You already know. I know rumour. I like facts better. You were there. Tell me. She folded her hands in her lap. It was the last day of the inquest. The coroner had finished questioning witnesses and I was typing the summary. Mr. Vanek came in, no official reason, said he was observing. But he took Dade aside in the hallway. I saw them talking through the glass door. When they came back, Dade looked sick. He changed 2 lines of testimony before he signed. It made Loring's suicide look cleaner than it was. That's a neat trick, tidying up the dead. She gave a small, tired laugh. Mr. Vanek had a way of making men tidy. Did anyone else see? No one who'd talk. I mentioned it to the clerk once, and he told me to mind my ribbon. That clerk still alive? Dead last winter, heart attack. Convenient, she nodded, for some people. The rain thickened against the window, turning the street outside into a smear of grey and lamplight. I took a sip of ginger ale, which tasted mostly of dust and good intentions. Miss Kelter, Cramer says you typed something else back then, a confession. She stared at the table. I wasn't supposed to keep a copy. But you did. I keep everything, she said softly. It's a habit from when papers went missing in that courthouse like socks in a laundry. She rose and went to the dresser. From the bottom drawer she pulled a manila envelope tied with twine. I made a ribbon copy, typed it on carbon because Mr. Loring seemed desperate. He dictated fast, then told me to destroy it. Said it was just a rehearsal, but before I could, he sent for it. Then, 2 days later, he was dead. I took the envelope. The paper inside was brittle, typed in faded purple ink. I could still make out the words through the dim light. To whom it may concern, I, Howard Loring, have become aware that funds under my supervision were diverted through the councilman's office for private disbursement. I am instructed to sign false vouchers. The rest trailed into smudged lines. You realize what this is? I asked. I realize it's the reason 2 men are dead. Why give it to me? She smiled faintly. Because Wolfe doesn't scare me. Everyone else does. I'll tell him you said that. He'll beam for hours. She almost laughed, then grew serious. You have to be careful, Mr. Goodwin. Dade thought he was playing both sides. So did Myron Hodge, and look what happened to him. Believe me, I noticed. She hesitated. If you print that, I'll deny it. But when Dade came last month, he asked me to make another copy. He said he was going to sell it to the Gazette. Use the money to leave town. I refused. He called me a fool. Maybe I was. You still have the carbon roll from that day? Yes. She glanced at the Remington. That machine's been with me 20 years. I could tell every letter's where by heart. That might save us. Wolfe can match it to the note copies from both deaths. Typed notes? She asked, eyes widening. 2 of them, 1 for each dead man. She exhaled slowly. Then whoever's writing them has the same habits as me, or the same machine. That gave me pause. You're saying... I'm saying I used to type letters for Councilman Vanek too, before I worked for the court. That tidbit landed like a hammer on glass. Did he keep your typewriter? No. He sent his secretary for it once, said his had broken, but I never got it back. I bought this one second-hand afterward. Miss Kelter, I could kiss you for that. I'd prefer you didn't, she said primly, though her cheeks coloured. Then I'll settle for gratitude. May I keep this draft? She nodded. Yes, but if anyone asks, you found it in the city archives. Fine by me, though you might want to move. This borough's developing a bad habit of killing witnesses. She looked toward the rain. I've been moving all my life, Mr. Goodwin. It hasn't helped yet. I stood, pocketing the envelope. Then lock your door and change your ribbon. Sometimes that's all the insurance policy a typist needs. Outside, the rain had turned from tapping to drumming. I was halfway down the stoop when her voice called after me. Mr. Goodwin, tell Mr. Wolfe something for me. Sure. Tell him guilt leaves fingerprints even on paper. I tipped my hat. I'll underline it. By the time I reached the cab stand, the envelope felt heavier than its ounces. Paper may not weigh much, but when it carries 3 bodies' worth of truth, it pulls like lead. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk, massaging his temples with the patience of a saint forced to share heaven with mortals. I handed him the envelope. He unfolded the draft, read a few lines, and nodded once. Excellent. Miss Kelter's memory, like her caution, has accrued interest. She's still scared. So am I, he said, of stupidity, which in this matter has been prolific. He looked up. Did she mention Vanek? Oh, she mentioned him. Seems he had a habit of borrowing typewriters. Maybe hers was the same one that wrote the suicide notes. His eyes gleamed. Order Saul to confirm it, and tell Cramer to find that machine, quickly. I dropped into the red chair. You think it's still around? If it is, Wolfe said, it will speak more eloquently than any witness. Paper trails, Archie, are the footprints of guilt. He reached for his beer, the glass fogging in his hand. Now go away. I must think. I stood, half smiling. That's becoming a habit. Good, he murmured. Habit breeds order. Order breeds revelation. I left him to his thoughts and the rain beating steadily against the windows. If memory were currency, Rose Kelter's had accrued back interest, and I had just made a very dangerous withdrawal. When Wolfe said he wanted a quiet evening, I should have known he meant the kind of quiet that comes right before a firing squad opens up. By 9 o'clock, the brownstone office looked like a courtroom with better lighting and worse tempers. Mrs. Loring arrived first, wrapped in mink and ice, gliding into the chair nearest the fireplace like she expected applause. Vanek followed, big and well-fed, his face the colour of boiled ham under the lamplight. Cramer came last, smelling of tobacco and civic indignation, and immediately claimed the corner by the Globe as if he planned to interrogate it. Wolfe sat behind his desk, serene and immovable, fingertips steepled. Gentlemen and madam, he began, we are met not for recrimination, but for revelation. Spare me the sermon, Vanek grunted. If you've got evidence, show it. Otherwise I'm not staying to be insulted. Wolfe gave him a look that could have curdled milk. You will remain until I conclude, sir. Leaving now would suggest you have something to fear. That landed. Vanek slumped back, muttering. Cramer shifted his cigar from one corner of his mouth to the other. You said you had something new, Wolfe. Let's hear it before he explodes. I shall be succinct, Wolfe said, which in Wolfe speak meant only 10 minutes. 2 men are dead, Loring and Dade. Both deaths bore the same signature, a typed note and an absence of fingerprints. The presumption of suicide is convenient but false. Murder, like gastronomy, depends upon timing and appetite. Mrs. Loring blinked. You mean someone wanted them dead for the same reason? Wolfe inclined his head. Precisely. Both men possessed evidence of corruption, one in guilt, one in blackmail. The appetite was political preservation. The timing was exquisite. Vanek flushed. Are you implying? I imply nothing, Wolfe interrupted smoothly. I demonstrate. Tomorrow, at 11, I shall provide proof whether Dade silenced himself or was silenced. Until then, we shall all refrain from melodrama. Archie note, getting Wolfe to refrain from melodrama was like getting Fritz to skip dessert. Cramer jabbed his cigar in the air. You've got a nerve, Wolfe, staging theatre while the department's on fire. I have, Inspector, both nerve and necessity. The police cannot act without evidence. I intend to produce it. Then I'll be here, Cramer said, narrowing his eyes. But if this is another one of your tricks... Pfui! It will be an experiment. Mr. Goodwin will handle the preliminaries. That was my cue, and I could tell by the gleam in Wolfe's eye it was one of the risky assignments he enjoyed assigning from the comfort of his chair. Sure, I said lightly. I'll juggle the dynamite. What do I tell the boys, boss? He leaned back, half-closing his eyes. You will inform Mr. Lon Cohen that his Gazette will soon receive a confession, Miss Rose Kelter's sworn statement implicating a member of the City Council in the falsification of a death record. Make certain the rumour spreads before midnight. Mrs. Loring gasped softly. Vanek's fingers twitched against his knee. Even Cramer stopped chewing. You're baiting someone, I said. Mind telling me which fish we're frying? Wolfe's eyes opened, dark and calm. The one that bites. Vanek rose, red-faced. You can't just throw around accusations. I throw nothing, Wolfe said evenly. But I suspect you will. You've been disposing of documents for 3 years. Why not add one more? Cramer stepped forward. Easy, Wolfe. You can't accuse a councilman without backing. I am not accusing, Inspector. I am inviting demonstration. If my supposition is wrong, no harm will come. If it is right, our culprit will act before dawn. Mrs. Loring stood abruptly. You're playing with fire, Mr. Wolfe. He nodded. Indeed, and fire, when controlled, is most revealing. I took that as the sign the curtain had fallen. As Fritz appeared silently with a tray of coffee, Wolfe waved him off without breaking stride. Archie, call Mr. Cohen. Tell him to be alert. Use his appetite for scandal as our spoon. Got it. Step 1, bait the ego. Wolfe's brow rose. You're improving. I aim to please, I said, reaching for the phone, though I'd prefer we cook with something less combustible. Cramer let out a sigh that sounded like a man ordering his own ulcer. All right, Wolfe. I'll post a man across the street in case your fish takes the hook. But if this backfires, it will not, Wolfe said. Good evening, Inspector. Cramer hesitated, then nodded grudgingly. All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report. When the door finally shut behind them, I turned to Wolfe. You know, you plan murders like recipes. Step 1, bait the ego. He gave a rare, small smile. Appetite, Archie, reveals character. And tonight, appetites shall determine guilt. He reached for his beer as I reached for the phone, both of us working our ends of the same menu. By 6:15, Manhattan had its neon makeup on and was ready for scandal. The story Saul and I had planted about Rose Kelter's impending confession had spread faster than a whisper in a speakeasy line. You'd think word of mouth was a public utility. The city never missed a chance to overheat on gossip. I was parked across from the Crown Diner on 8th, nursing a ginger ale and pretending to study the menu. Inside, Rose was at a corner booth, hands folded over her handbag like a nun guarding relics. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked Trouble dressed as a grey overcoat. He was trim, neat, and had the wary eyes of a man who'd spent too much time cleaning other people's messes. He didn't order food, just scanned the booths and picked one with a view of Rose's reflection in the mirror. Amateur hour. Saul, 2 tables behind him, didn't even blink. 10 minutes later, Rose stood, paid, and stepped out into the misty air. The man followed. I slipped out after him. Saul moved faster. By the time I reached the corner, the aide was face first against a lamppost, courtesy of Saul's left hand. Relax, Saul said quietly. We only ask questions. You can breathe when you answer. The man wheezed. Look, I wasn't going to hurt her. Mr. Vanek just said to get the letter back before it went public. That's all? I asked. You weren't planning to autograph it with another typed suicide note? He flinched. I don't know anything about that. I swear, he just said to recover the document at any cost. Yeah, I said, and the cost's about to go up. I motioned Saul off him. Beat it home, pal. but if you so much as sniff around the Gazette, we'll collect the tax." He vanished into the fog like a bad debt. Saul handed me a matchbook he'd fished from the man's pocket. City Hall Lounge, embossed in gold. "That'll do," I said. "Get back to Rose, make sure she's locked up tight. Wolfe will want the details before dessert." Saul nodded once and melted away, leaving me with the matchbook and a street full of questions. By 7:30 I was back at the brownstone, shaking drizzle off my coat. Wolfe was at his desk, the globe turned toward Africa as if it had personally offended him. "Report," he said. I laid out the confession, the tale, and Vanek's marching orders. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, fingers drumming on the armrest. When I finished, he opened them. Slow, heavy, deliberate. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you will bring them all here. Mrs. Loring, Mr. Vanek, and Inspector Cramer." "Tonight?" "Tonight. The truth, once loosed, should never be allowed to wander." I grinned. And here I thought the show wasn't scheduled till tomorrow. He reached for the bell cord. "Pfui, the stage is set. Now we summon the actors." There are nights in that brownstone when the air gets so thick with tension you could slice it and serve it with Fritz's béarnaise. That night was one of them. The lamps burned low, the curtains drawn tight against the October chill, and the office looked less like a room and more like a stage set for an execution. Only Wolfe could have arranged it that way without touching a single prop. Mrs. Loring came first, every hair in place, pearls trembling at her throat. She sat rigidly on the edge of a red chair, as though proximity to truth might stain the upholstery. Vanek followed, a heavy man with a heavier conscience wrapped in his tailored overcoat, like a man hoping wool could substitute for armour. Behind him came Cramer, cigar lit and jaw set. Saul Panzer leaned near the wall, as quiet as wallpaper, but twice as observant. Lon Cohen took a corner seat, notebook in his pocket and a look that said he'd rather be holding dynamite than sitting on it. And me? I had the best seat in the house, behind Wolfe's desk lamp, where I could watch the play unfold and keep my mouth shut unless instructed to drop a line. Wolfe himself was at his desk, the great bulk of him centred like a monument, yellow chair gleaming under the lamplight. His eyes were half-lidded, and his hands rested on the polished wood, as if he owned not only the table but the truth upon it. At exactly 8 o'clock he spoke. "I thank you all for coming. I trust we may conclude this sordid affair with fewer theatrics than those already committed." Vanek snorted. "If you're accusing me again—" "Pfui," Wolfe said, lifting one hand. "I accuse no one until I'm certain, but I demonstrate, sir, and that process has now concluded." He turned to Cramer. "Inspector, I must again commend your endurance under the absurd glare of public opinion. It has been weaponized against you most cruelly." Cramer grunted. "Skip the butter, Wolfe. Just tell me what you've got." "As you wish." Wolfe leaned back. 3 years ago, Howard Loring, a city contractor, falsified accounts in concert with certain political sponsors. The fraud was modest by modern standards, mere thousands, but it was sufficient to ruin reputations should it have been exposed. A clerk, Lionel Dade, discovered irregularities and retained proof. Rather than confront Loring directly, he sold his silence to another, a man whose power could ensure both cover and protection. Vanek's fingers twitched. "That's a lie." "It is not," Wolfe said, cutting the air with his voice. "You, Councilman Vanek, purchased that silence, but silence has no loyalty. Dade grew bold, and when you refused further payment, he threatened exposure. Howard Loring, despairing, attempted to write a confession, but he was not permitted to finish it." Mrs. Loring's hands went white around her purse. "I have in my possession," Wolfe continued, "a draft typed by his stenographer, Miss Rose Kelter. The content is incomplete but unmistakable. He feared political retribution from his associate V. That document vanished after the inquest, as did Dade." Vanek's voice cracked. "You can't prove that." "Mr. Goodwin." Wolfe didn't even look at me. I rose, crossed to the desk and laid down 2 sheets, one photostat of Dade's so-called suicide note and one of Loring's. "Souvenirs," I said. "Both typed, both from the same Royal typewriter, model KHM, serial 212987. Cramer's eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" "Saul took the impressions to a typewriter expert on 42nd, I said. "The alignment of the E and R is as personal as a fingerprint." Wolfe's hand rested lightly on the papers. And that typewriter, Inspector, sits in Councilman Vanek's municipal office. Vanek surged to his feet. That's absurd. Hundreds of people use that machine. Wolfe's eyes opened fully now, and they were as cold as the marble bust over the door. Not hundreds. One secretary. And yourself. You used it late at night, 2 occasions in 3 months. Once to produce a note for Howard Loring and again for Lionel Dade. You created their farewells and called it mercy. In truth, it was expedience. The silence that followed could have outlasted an opera pause. Even Fritz, hovering by the doorway with the coffee tray, didn't dare breathe too loud. Mrs. Loring spoke first. Her voice was thin. "You're saying he, Vanek, killed my husband?" Wolfe didn't look at her. "I am saying he drove him to it, madam, by threat and coercion. Whether your husband's final act was despair or defiance remains uncertain, but Mr. Vanek ensured no word of confession survived." Her pearls rattled as she trembled. "I knew he'd been meeting with someone. He said it was politics, not crime." "It was both," Wolfe said. Vanek turned on her, face red. "Don't you dare!" Cramer stepped between them. "Sit down, Councilman. You've said enough." Wolfe's voice cut through again, low and deliberate. "When Lionel Dade resurfaced, your fear rekindled. You dispatched an aide to retrieve what you thought he still held. A letter, a photograph, perhaps the draft confession. When that failed, you ensured Dade could speak no more. The note, once again, appeared neatly typed and unsigned." Vanek's hands clenched. "You've got no proof I was there." Wolfe reached for the bell cord. "Mr. Pantzer." Saul moved forward, producing a small envelope. "Photographic print," he said quietly. "Taken from the Hoboken warehouse cabinet. Your aide's fingerprint beside Dade's." Cramer took it, examined it, and gave a curt nod. "It's solid, Wolfe," Vanek sagged. "You think this means, what, that I killed him myself?" "No," Wolfe said, almost pitying. "I think you ordered it, and then arranged the semblance of suicide to preserve your position. And when a brave inspector's reputation threatened to complicate your narrative, you accused him, preemptively, of concealment. You, sir, called a good man murderer to conceal your own." Cramer's cigar went out between his fingers. He didn't move, just watched Vanek as if the years of police procedure had boiled down to this single moment. Vanek's mouth opened and closed. The words came jagged. "You can't prove it was me." "Proof is a privilege of the courtroom," Wolfe said. "I trade in reason. But I suspect, Inspector, that with this demonstration you will find the missing fragments of both Dade's courage and your own vindication." Cramer nodded grimly. "Yeah, I think we can take it from here." Wolfe's head dipped once, final. "Do so, Inspector, and when you next hear the press bray my name, perhaps you'll offer them an alternative melody." Cramer pocketed the evidence. "All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report." It came out quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that could move mountains. Mrs. Loring rose unsteadily. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you. I didn't want to believe—" Wolfe raised a hand. "Madam, gratitude is unnecessary. I detest injustice. It offends the symmetry of thought." She gave a broken nod and allowed Saul to escort her out. Vanek followed, guarded now by Cramer's silence. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back, eyes shutting. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Beer." I fetched the bottle and glass from the sideboard, poured it and set it before him. He took one sip, sighed and said, "The city has a remarkable appetite for corruption. Fortunately, it also digests remorse, if fed slowly." Lon Cohen, still in his corner, scribbled a line in his notebook. "You realize this'll make tomorrow's front page?" "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Kindly ensure it is written with care. I will not have the syntax mangled." Lon grinned. "That's one headline I won't have to dress up." When he'd gone, Wolfe closed his eyes again. "Mr. Goodwin, you may inform Fritz that the world may resume spinning, and you may tell Inspector Cramer, when next you see him, that he owes me precisely one cigar of tolerable quality." "Sure," I said. "You'll collect it right after hell freezes." He lifted a brow. "A vulgar idiom, but perhaps apt." I leaned against the desk, watching him sip his beer. "If you'd banged a gavel, the walls would have obeyed." "Phooey, they obeyed anyway." I laughed. The brownstone was quiet again, our kind of quiet. And outside, somewhere beyond the curtains, Manhattan exhaled, the city's pulse steadying after another scandal dissected and buried. For Wolfe, it was just another evening. For me, it was proof that no matter how tangled the city got, there was one man who could straighten it out, without ever leaving his chair. The brownstone never feels bigger than it does after a storm breaks inside it. Midnight had the place hushed again, the air still tasting faintly of sweat, smoke, and confession. Vanek had gone out between Stebbins' elbows half an hour ago, looking like a man whose own reflection had just turned state's evidence. Now it was just Wolfe, Cramer, Lon Cohen, and me. Fritz had cleared the coffee cups, and the fire had burned down to a red pulse. Cramer hadn't said a word since the door shut on Vanek. He stood by the globe, cigar unlit, the ashtray full of casualties from earlier rounds. Wolfe hadn't moved either. He sat massive and silent behind his desk, eyes closed, fingers tented, the picture of digestion, intellectual, moral, and otherwise. I figured if the building had been hit by lightning, he might have flicked an eyebrow. Finally, Cramer exhaled. It wasn't just air leaving. It was weeks of suspicion, headlines, and sleepless nights. "You saved my badge, Wolfe," he said quietly, "and maybe my sanity." Wolfe opened one eye. "Nonsense. I preserved the logic of events. You merely refrained from impeding it." Cramer's mouth twitched. "That's your way of saying thanks?" "I do not thank men for performing their duty," Wolfe said. "You sought truth. I facilitated it. Symbiosis, not sentiment." I couldn't resist. And here I thought this was the start of a beautiful friendship. Cramer gave me a look that could sand paint, then turned back to Wolfe. "You know, for all your fat-headed pride, you're not half bad when you're right." Wolfe grunted, which for him was almost emotional. "And you, Inspector, for all your obstinate bluster, have the rare merit of being incorruptible. You saved my patience. That will suffice." There was a pause, one of those moments that, in our line of work, counts as intimacy. Cramer nodded once, slowly. "All right, Wolfe, I'll take that." He looked older then, the lines around his mouth less like trenches and more like scars. "Guess I'd better get back downtown. Paperwork's waiting and the DA's going to want the whole fairy tale." Lon Cohen rose, slipping his notebook into his pocket. "Don't worry, Inspector. The Gazette's headline will do you justice this time. Front page, above the fold." Cramer snorted. "Yeah? Make sure it spells my name right for once." Lon grinned and shook his hand before heading out. I walked him to the door, watched the cab lights smear down the wet pavement, then came back in. Cramer was still there, hesitating like a man who'd misplaced his coat, but didn't want to admit it. "Something else, Inspector?" I asked. He stubbed his unlit cigar into the tray. "No, just needed a minute to believe it's over." "It's over," I said. "And for once, nobody's blaming you for it." He gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, that'll be a novelty." He turned to Wolfe. "Good night." Wolfe inclined his head. "Good night, Inspector." Cramer went out quietly, closing the door without the usual slam. I watched through the window as he climbed into the squad car, shoulders straighter, stride lighter. He looked 10 pounds thinner, all in guilt. Behind me came the familiar chink of glass on wood. I turned. Wolfe had poured himself a beer, golden and cold in its frosted glass. "Midnight snack?" I asked. "Celebration," he said simply. "For what?" "For order restored. Fui." He took a long sip, eyes half shut in weary satisfaction, and with that the case, like the beer, was finished. The next afternoon the brownstone smelled like victory wearing an orchid corsage. The plant rooms were in their prime, and even the air in the office had the smug kind of peace that only comes when the headlines land exactly where they should. I was at my desk, reading the Gazette in my best imitation of a courtroom voice. "Cramer cleared, Vanek indicted," I intoned, as if I were announcing the 10 Commandments. Subhead: Detectives' persistence and private inquiry uncover political blackmail ring. That's us if you squint sideways. From behind his desk, Wolfe didn't so much as twitch a lip. He was staring at the article through half-closed eyes, fingertips pressed together like a man testing the integrity of the universe. "Justice," he murmured finally, "when tardy offends my digestion." "That's so," I said. "Then it's a good thing Fritz scheduled roast duck for lunch. That ought to soothe the offended parts." He gave me one of those looks, half disdain, half reluctant tolerance. "Mr. Goodwin, you have a genius for irreverence, if only it were tethered to intellect." "Don't sell me short. I tied the intellect up out back so it wouldn't disturb the orchids." He grunted and reached for the paper. "Your reading is tedious. I prefer the printed word to your editorial embellishments." I leaned back, crossed my legs, and studied him. "You're welcome. You realize, of course, that this makes us defenders of the innocent. Maybe we should have business cards printed. Nero Wolfe and Associates. Moral sanitation. Reasonable rates." He closed the Gazette with surgical precision. "Nonsense. We defend accuracy. Morality is a byproduct, rarely pure." I said, "Then maybe I should ask for a raise in accuracy." "Your salary," he said, "is ample. Your mouth excessive. I see no relation worth rewarding." Right on cue, Fritz appeared in the doorway, all stainless calm and culinary authority. The silver tray bore roast duck, crisp and aromatic, flanked by potatoes that gleamed like they'd signed a contract with butter. Fritz didn't need to speak. He simply looked pleased that life, and his kitchen, had resumed order. "Lunch is served, gentlemen." Wolfe rose, the chair creaking in gratitude. "Excellent, Fritz. If civilization endures, it will be because men like you outnumber those like Mr. Goodwin." Fritz bowed slightly and withdrew. I trailed Wolfe into the dining room because a man's got to suffer through triumph somehow. The table gleamed, orchids watched from the window, and outside the city kept grinding its teeth. Wolfe sat and examined his plate like a general inspecting the front line. "The duck," he said, "is restorative. After contamination by public affairs, I require a return to the elemental." "That's what I keep telling you," I said. "You should take up golf. It's all elemental, grass, sun, swearing." He cut into the duck with the solemnity of a priest. "Pfui. The game was invented to humiliate intellect. I prefer problems that yield to reason, not holes in the ground." I took my first bite. "Well, here's to holes in the case, then. They've all been filled. Cramer's reputation, your ego, and my stomach." He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "You are incorrigible." "That's my charm," I said. "Besides, it beats being unemployed. If we're now protectors of civic virtue, I figure a 10% raise is fair." He sipped his beer, cool and precise. "Mr. Goodwin, I pay you to assist me, not to jest at my expense." "Who's jesting?" I took my raise in roast duck and counted it moral profit. He set down the glass. "Adequate. Now be silent. The only suitable accompaniment to Fritz's duck is serenity." So I shut up, mostly, and let serenity earn its keep.